outlook. Meanwhile, power demand has been surging, and that has also been communicated by the central government. What do we do in this situation? Anil Razdan, the former Power Secretary, is joining us on the show. Sabyasachi Majumdar, Senior Vice President and Group Head Corporate Ratings at ICRA. Harry Dole, Director General of the Independent Power Producers of India Association, is joining us today as well. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Razdan, from you, Mr. Majumdar, a question that I asked Mr. Razdan as well. If you were to pinpoint what really is the reason behind this crisis, would you say it's the global coal prices which have shot up, which led to lesser imports than was needed, or was it an inefficient distribution, which is why the panic button that has been pressed today on railways transporting that very necessary coal to the places that need them?
As I see it, it is more of a commercial and a financial issue rather than a technical issue. As you would be aware that the normative coal stocks which should be there with the generators is about 24 days. But as we see, the actual is somewhere around 7 to 8 to 9 days. Now, why is that happening? Because very little coal is available on credit, whether you purchase from the imports or whether you get it from the domestic source. Both the coal producer as well as the transporter, the logistics companies, whether it's the railways or road transport, everything has to be paid upfront. So if you have to keep a stock of 24 days, you also have to have the financial muscle to hold on to 24 days. But the real problem here is that most of the discoms in the country are running into deficits. And what do when they run into deficits? They cannot really afford to default on banks because they need the funding from them. So by default, they start stretching payments to the generating companies. So the generating companies don't have the cash flow or the working capital to basically stock up on the coal. Otherwise, what would have happened is that during the time where the demand is relatively lean, which is during the winter months, they could have always stocked the coal. I mean, the coal is available. It's just that the prices are very high. For instance, in a normal year, we import almost 10% of our total thermal coal is imported. But last year in 21-22, because of the spiraling international coal prices, most of the...
Just let me come in for a second. You said that it's a finance problem because someone has to eventually pay. Mr. Dole said a few minutes ago that the discoms are not paying. Why are the discoms not paying? Who at the end of this chain is not paying?
Basically, you see what is happening, there are two reasons. See, overall the discoms are running a deficit. Now, we don't have the combined financial position of all the discoms, but it can safely be assumed that the gap would be anywhere between at least 40 to 50 paisa. For every unit of power that they are purchasing, they're at least making a loss of 40 to 50 paisa. What are the reasons for that? Reason for that is multifold. One, the biggest reason of course is that the actual AT&C, the revenues and the tariffs for all discoms are based on certain norms regarding at what purchase you are going to purchase power, what is the total number of units you are going to supply and to what consumer, and what subsidy you are getting and what losses you are incurring. But what we are seeing is that the actual AT&C losses which are being incurred are much higher than what is allowed by the regulator by fixing the tariff. So that is one of the biggest reasons why there is a deficit. Secondly, the subsidy which is assessed for the various discoms based on the normative, mix of supplies to agriculture and the low-end domestic segment, we always see that there is a substantial amount of provision with respect to the gap which arises out of supply to these segments. And thirdly, even when there is a gap in the past, there is a process called true-up which is supposed to allow the discoms to recover all past, legitimate losses with a gap. So the truing process also gets inordinately delayed in many states. So cumulatively, what we see, all these results in a loss of almost like 40-50,000 crores or thereabouts. And the fact that in the last, because of the COVID-related disruptions, there has been hardly any tariff hikes over the last 2 to 3 years. All these are the factors which have resulted in substantial gap between the revenues and cost structures of a discom. And the net result is that there is a cumulative gap of more than 1 lakh crores of overdue payments to the generators. So that is basically the biggest issue. If these gaps are not there, most of the generation companies would have had enough financial muscle to have sourced coal either from imported source or from the domestic suppliers and kept relatively comfortable stock level.
Everyone saying we have enough stresses on the taxpayer. But, I need to wrap this, but quick word from you, Mr. Majumdar, on solutions that we are talking about right now. Some long-term, some short-term ones have been talked about. What can be done immediately so that we ensure there's no power crisis? I mean, there may be politics behind it, but if a state government says that my metro and my hospitals may not have electricity, it's definitely a big warning sign. It can't be ignored.
So, obviously for the long term, I think the solutions have already been, discussed by Mr. Dol and Mr. Razdan. Basically need to set our, response right. We need to have the DISCOM financials in place and also invest in demand side management and those kind of initiatives. But in the very short run, obviously, we need to try to, ramp up coal availability by, facilitating imports. If necessary, I think the government is already trying to improve coal rake availability. Plus, on top of that, if necessary, we need to look at road transportation also. But at the same time, the state governments also have to, put in money and ensure that, DISCOMs are able to pay these, service providers, whether they are, the colliers or they are the transport companies or transport agencies to ensure that coal movement is there. Then we have about 25,000 megawatt of gas plants which are almost lying idle. Now, of course, they don't have low-cost domestic gas available, but they can run on RLNG subject of certain, pipeline constraints at the plants. They can also run on naphtha, although the marginal cost of running on imported RLNG or naphtha will be more than 15 rupees. So, solutions are available, but there's a cost. But again, it's not that you'll be paying 15 rupees per unit on the entire units. It may just be about 4 to 5% of the total because our, average shortage is about 4%. So, it's the call that the state governments have to take and the central government has to take as to whether they are willing to look at these kind of short-term high-cost solutions to partly, if not fully, bridge the gap.
Yeah. So we need to find solutions at all ends. I mean, we had this discussion last year during the rains when coal mines were flooded and then we had a coal crisis. It is looking like it may be a recurring problem unless we definitely accelerate our efforts. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on the lead debate this evening, where we've been talking about a looming power crisis. And, the politics aside, it truly is a serious situation. Now, one of the reasons why the power crisis has become such a big issue is because of the weather. After the hottest March in over a century, April is seeing a string of heat waves across the country, naturally boosting demand for power supply, leading to power cuts in several states. How are the states